And so the first thing that we're going to look at is we're going to look at the WEF. And there's a lot to say about the WEF in general. I mean, obviously, we've heard about the whole Great Reset. We've heard about that article written by one of their young members that they're raising up to be future leaders within the world, talking about how you're going to own nothing and you're going to have no privacy and you're going to love it. But when it comes specifically to food and the Great Reset, one of the things that I hold up as evidence. So like, here's the question: is does the WEF really want to control food supply, or is this just something that's blown out of proportion? I would say that I think there's definitely an agenda within the WEF to control and manipulate agricultural markets in accordance with their agenda as part of the Great Reset, right? I don't think it's some sort of whacked out conspiracy theory. Why do I not think that? Well, because they brag about it at their meetings. But then we saw this case. We actually did a whole episode on this, but it was the whole why the Dutch farmer protest is your cause too. And what this was all about was the WEF had put out these recommendations. They had a lot of people that have gone through their Young Leaders program that are now in the parliament within the Netherlands, and they passed sweeping legislation. Just absolutely sweeping legislation that was going to require roughly about 30% of a lot of the, nitrogen heavy, agricultural heavy things like dairy farming, hog farms, things like that, was going to cause almost 33% of them to essentially go out of business. They were going to have to sell off the land in order to meet the fertilizer requirements that this new law was going to put into place. And the thing that we talked about that was interesting about that, you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's okay, the Netherlands are great. We got a European country that decided to go woke on agriculture. Is that really a shock? And the reason why it is, the reason why the timing of all of this is kind of suspicious, is because this is going on at the same time that Ukraine, which is responsible for a significant portion of wheat exports and other cereal exports to the rest of the world, they're obviously not growing a whole lot right now, right? There isn't a whole lot of exports, at least not to the degree that it used to be within Ukraine. Plus, you had major energy concerns because of the war in Ukraine. And at the same time that all that is happening, the Netherlands is doing. So why is it important to us, to all of us, that this is going on in the Netherlands? Because the Netherlands is the second largest food exporter in the world.
Wow. It's a small country, too.
It's a tiny country.
It's a very efficient country.
It is a tiny country, but it's got incredible agricultural land. And the way that the farmers over there have managed their agricultural resources have been incredibly productive. And the bottom line is Europe and other places of the world depend on the agricultural production of the Netherlands to be able to keep their food prices at something that everybody can afford. And so the question is why would you be so determined at this point to push this particular agenda? You would think you'd at least have the common sense to be like, okay, well, all right, maybe we would like to do this, and maybe this is a great goal over the next 30 years. But my gosh, with a major war, with an energy crisis, with a food crisis going on, with people still recovering from COVID and supply chain issues, maybe this isn't the best time to essentially shut down 30% of Dutch agriculture.
Well, keep in mind that it's not just Europe historically Europe relied on Ukraine for food. That's why it's known as the breadbasket of Europe. But in the post-World War II economy, especially since Ukraine was then shut off from the rest of Western Europe because it was part of the Soviet Union, that's part of the reason the Netherlands became the agricultural powerhouse that it was because Western Europe needed another source of food and they couldn't get access from Eastern Europe anymore. So it's really funny that in the 1960s and 70s, the Dutch government basically did everything they possibly could to encourage the agricultural industry to grow and thrive. And now they're doing basically everything they can to destroy it. And if you take the Netherlands out of the equation, suddenly Europe now only has really two places that it can get most of its food from, the United States and Canada.
Yeah.
In fact, if it weren't for the fact that the Canadian grain harvest this past year was actually really, really good, food prices in Europe would probably be way, way worse because Canada is the number 5 exporter in the world. So, what I'm trying to say is that, the situation looks bad right now, but it could have been much worse.
Yeah, much worse.
And by the way, it's not just the Netherlands where this is going on. You said earlier, do we have evidence to suggest that the World Economic Forum or some of these other type of groups do have somewhat nefarious, motives behind some of the stuff that they're saying. And one, yes, we know that they do because you can go look at some of their statements.
And
that
keep
they
in
put
mind,
out.
they don't think it's nefarious.
They don't think it's nefarious. We do.
Yeah.
That's a difference of opinion there. I think they're totally wrong, but we've seen what they've said before. It was just a few years ago, they were tweeting out about how, overpopulation is the biggest threat facing the world. That alongside climate change, right?
Yeah.
That really implies something. But look at their actions. And it's not just in the Netherlands. It's also in Sri Lanka.
Oh, my gosh.
Which is like their poster child for the WEF's whole entire economic model being applied and failing miserably.
Yeah.
We actually just did a Y Minute on this recently that hasn't been released yet, if I recall.
I think it's just...
it just came out yesterday,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. Came out yesterday.
The story in Sri Lanka is crazy. I want to read something off that I discovered that I did not incorporate in the script for the Y Minutes because, we're trying to give a broad view of things. So in 2021, in April 2021, the government in Sri Lanka announced that they were banning all forms of agriculture that are not organic.
Oh, my God.
The most extreme policy that no country, not even in the Netherlands are they doing this.
No.
The Netherlands is they're playing checkers and they're playing chess in Sri Lanka, right? Or 5D chess in Sri Lanka. So they announced that they were banning all forms of non-organic agriculture. Well, some of the justifications that were put forward were just ridiculous.
Yeah.
There was one member of the presidential task force that was assigned to basically oversee this transition towards organic agriculture. And when critics were bringing up, this is going to completely destroy the economy, the response was, well, this is going to be a healthy decision because did you know that 2,000 years ago, Pliny the Elder wrote about the Sri Lankans. Pliny the Elder was a Roman historian, very famous Roman historian. A lot of his work survived to this day. And he wrote that the average Sri Lankan was living 140 years, but modern agricultural practices have cut that in half to only 74 years. Okay, first off, this is to give some oversight here.
Yeah.
When Roman historians are writing about a place like Sri Lanka, which is, from their point of view, the edge of the world, that's like here be
dragons. It's not like they were visiting.
They weren't visiting. This is hearsay. It's like, have you ever played telephone?
Yeah.
And by the time it gets to the last person at the end of the line, the story is so distorted that it's so detached from reality. That's what Roman historians were doing. They couldn't even locate Sri Lanka on a map. They heard about it from some merchants. There's this island near India, and then they come up with these wild stories about it, and suddenly you start talking about how the Amazons live there, and they have a lifespan of over 100 years.
Here's what's kind of suspect, too, about what they were doing over there. I've got no problem with organic farming. I love organic farming. I mean, if you ever, gosh, we got a whole thing we're going to be doing on Joel Salatin because I think he's a great guy and he talks a lot about kind of the like heavy industrial and fertilizer rich, farming versus organic and composting. And I'm a big believer that composting is an awesome way to farm and the whole deal. However, we're at a stage right now where our entire economic system with respect to agriculture is heavily dependent on a particular type of industrial farming. And you might not like that and you might want to change that and you might want to create incentives over time. Okay, fine. But when you just say, nope, not doing it anymore, the end result is like you destroy the rice and tea industry in Sri Lanka. And the next thing you know, you have poverty. And one of the biggest things that I think people like us are trying to explain to people that, hey, I want more organic farming. Great, we don't disagree with you. But you're not going to get more organic farming when you shut down agricultural production by 30% overnight.
Through government mandates.
Through government mandate. What you're going to get is revolts, right? Same thing with...
and that's exactly what happened in Sri Lanka. They literally overthrew the government. The prime minister resigned and huge members of the parliament switched parties. By the way, when they did this switch, the rice production in Sri Lanka fell by 20% in 6 months.
Yeah.
So whole industries wiped out. The tea industry was also completely wiped out.
So the bottom line is I think when we're looking at the WEF, do they have an agenda with respect to controlling agriculture? I think that is fact check true.
Fact check true.
Absolutely. They want to do it and they think they're doing it for your own good. Mm-hmm. And they definitely think that meat is a problem. And they, again, when we go into the whole thing with bugs and everything else.